Mike, thank you for coming on. So we have Mike Sommer, WaxPackHero, one of, I think, a similar era of sports card content creators. I know your podcast started around 2019. I think I was on episode like 32. I think I looked it up earlier. I was on like one of the early 30 episodes. So that was great. I really appreciate that back in the day. I mean, so I guess we'll kind of start there. Like for you, like when did content kind of come into the fold when it came to sports cards and all that kind of stuff? And how did you how did you start doing content around sports cards? And I'm interested to hear about that.
Yeah. So it really stems back to when I re-entered the hobby back in late 2015, early 2016 is when I kind of rejoined the hobby world. And I always tell people, it didn't take me too long to realize that if I wanted to collect the way that I did as a kid, that I was going to have to do something different, right? So much had changed from when I was collecting in the 80s and 90s to the way things were in the mid 20 teens, right? The 15, 16. And so it took me a while to really kind of get my feet underneath me to figure out what collecting was like. This idea of Topps being the only licensed manufacturer, the exclusivity, right, that existed at that point, that was completely new to me. And the cost of product was new to me. The idea of hit chasing was new to me, right? Because when I collected as a kid, everybody built sets, and maybe there was a few insert cards that you would collect too. But this idea of hits in every box and chasing hits, all of this was new to me. And eventually I started to started to figure out ways where I could buy and sell a little bit to generate some profit to help cover the cost of the cards that I wanted to keep, right? I started to figure out ideas like that were working for me. I started to figure out how to navigate not just collecting by buying new packs and boxes, but by buying collections and doing some trades and making bulk purchases and things like that. And so I was also at the same time consuming as much card related content as I could. And at that time, it was mostly podcasts. There weren't really too many YouTube shows out back in 2015, 2016. And so I was consuming content, and some of the content creators that I was listening to, podcasters that I was listening to, were folks like Sports Card Radio. And one of the things that they always talked about is, hey, it's one thing to buy and sell cards, but there's another thing where you can create passive income by creating content around cards that people can consume 24 hours a day, click on affiliate links, see the ads from your blog. And so they were one of the primary inspirations for me starting to create a blog, or thinking about, if I was going to do this, what would it be about? And then from what I wanted to speak about, it was really, hey, there's got to be more people like me who collected as a kid and are now re-entering the hobby here, 15, 20 years later, who are going to be in that same situation, realizing so much had changed. Maybe I can share some of the things that I've learned along the way over these last couple of years, so that other people coming in will have a resource to go to help ease that transition back into the hobby world. And so I started with a blog, with the WaxPackHero blog. I think it was in 2017. And so it was a couple years even before I started the podcast, where I started with just the blog and starting to engage people on social media. And so I started to write some articles, and I would get some feedback from some other well-established bloggers and writers like Ryan Cracknell from Beckett, Eric Norton from Beckett, Joey Shriver from Dub Mentality, maybe is better known as Dub Mentality. And I was reaching out to folks like that, Beans Ball Card Blog, other bloggers who are writing about cards, to say, hey, here's this idea that I'm working on. Here's the concept I'm going for. I'd love some feedback from you guys on what connects with you, or what I might be able to consider and do a little different. And so from early on, that was the idea. I was reaching out, trying to get feedback on that idea. And I started to gain some traction and get some feedback from folks that they were finding value in those original articles that I was putting out on the WaxPackHero blog.
Definitely. And yeah, I mean, when I was coming back into cards, like there was really, like you had said, there was really no content at all. Like that was sort of the one thing that I was, I guess, a little bit surprised by, because I had been doing some content. Like I had been doing like I was doing sports graphic design. I had ran a sports graphic design page where I was essentially doing what I'm doing now with content, but doing it with I was making like a sports design and posting on Instagram and trying to learn the Instagram algorithm and all this kind of stuff. And then trying to learn about graphic design and stuff. So, I mean, I had come from a content design-ish background. And when I was getting into sports cards, the concept of trying to figure out what rookie card was the first rookie card of a player was it was there weren't any articles. There was cardboard connections, there like you said, you mentioned a ton of great names there. I mean, I also drew from Let Me Get That Potograph, Mojo Breaks, there are a ton of different podcasts and content people that I found along the way that really helped me. And I think you as well too. I mean, I think a lot of the content you create is really great. Is there, let people know sort of what the focus of your content is? Do you kind of what's your niche, I guess, is one way to put it, I suppose.
Yeah, I'd say the primary focus or the primary idea was trying to help ease that transition back in for somebody who is returning to the hobby. Sub focus, or maybe what it's turned into now more, is trying to highlight ways where somebody can have a self-sustaining hobby. So it was important to me. One of those things that I kind of talked about was, if I wanted to collect the way that I wanted to collect, I didn't want to use all paycheck money to do that. I wanted to be able to have the hobby somewhat sustain itself. So I was incurring less out-of-pocket costs. And as I continued to do that, I continued to find opportunities to actually fully cover the cost of my collection. And so right now, 100% of my collection is completely paid for through the profits of buying and selling other cards. And
Wow.
all of the inventory that I have to resell is also already been paid for through profits, right? So my actual out-of-pocket cost to collect and build my vintage collection and build all my everything is 100% paid for with profits from the resale side of things. And so I talk a lot about that type of stuff. I really like to highlight some sets and products that are somewhat overlooked, or maybe they're not as widely known about or as widely as popular. So a lot of the articles you'll see me do now are about some of these niche products. And then some upper deck products. They're kind of they provide me with some products to open and test out and write about. And so there's a lot of upper deck content and a lot of niche products that I write about now. The podcast is similar, that I kind of cover some of those things, as well as highlight a lot of different super collectors, people who have different focuses in their own collections, and then bring on industry representatives, people who work for different marketplaces, manufacturers, and things like that. So that's kind of what the podcast content is all about.
Yeah, I mean, I everything that you said there, I mean, I agree with. I think that's one of the cool things about the hobby, is that it can be like a self-sustaining hobby, where I feel like if you're in other industries, whether it's, I don't know, painting, or if it's you build Legos or you do anything. I mean, there's so many different industries nowadays that are hobbies. I feel like the sports cards, and it's interesting. I also think it's interesting that we have sort of just planted our flag in the ground, we are the hobby, this is the hobby. I think that's kind of a funny little nuance to the sports card industry. It's there are so many other hobbies, and we're one of the only ones that are really self-sustaining. And I think the other great point that you made there is that you're saying that everything pretty much in your collection and that you have is all based off of what you bought and sold, and you're kind of you've broken even. And I mean, I'm sure for you, in some cases, you've even probably made a little bit of profit from some sort of things. And I mean, you put out a great, one of your TikToks actually that you put out recently that I thought really highlights kind of a section of the hobby that I feel like maybe is not as talked about, is I don't remember the specific card. I know it was a Topps basketball card that you talked about, that you sold for 26 cents, and you sold it 200 times and you made $600. I think those were the numbers from it. But talk a little bit about is that sort of I know is that sort of, we just kind of discussed niche a little bit, but is that something you enjoy doing, or is that something that you kind of do so that way you can buy other cards?
Yeah. So a little of both, right? So, and I talked about this in an upcoming article for Hobby News Daily, but that stemmed from when I came back in 2016. I still wanted to build sets like I did as a kid, but I went into my LCS and I was like, yeah, I'd like to see your box of singles for 2016, 2017 Donruss basketball, or 2014, 2015, whatever year it was that I was trying to fill out. And he's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, like your monster box of singles so I can fill my sets. And he's like, oh no, hobby shops don't really do that kind of thing anymore. Like when I was a kid, you just go in and say, show me your 87 tops, and you'd fill it out and pick out number 35 and 63 and whatever. So I was like, well, I still want to build a set, but I got to find a way to do that. And so I did some digging on message boards and searching the internet, and found ComC and found Sport Lots as two sites where you could still buy base and insert cards to fill sets, right? And so I started using it to buy, and then I would be getting these collections and buying bulk from people, because around here, a lot of the people that I knew, they were only after hits. And so I'd be able to scoop up, somebody would go into the shop and they would buy 2 or 3 boxes of some flagship product, whatever it is. And they'd only take the hits and the low numbered serial cards, and the rest they'd just shove in the dime box. And the shop owner would be like, you want that? I'll sell you the whole box for $30. And so all of a sudden I would be buying 2,000 to 3,000 base and insert cards for $30. And I'm like, all right, this is great. I can fill my sets. And then I was like, now what am I going to do with all these extras? Well, maybe I can try to sell them on Sport Lots, since that's where I'm buying stuff. And so that started building my inventory, and that's what started to generate some of those initial sales to help have that self-sustaining hobby. So that TikTok was an example of, so many people still think that base and insert cards are worthless because set builders aren't the vocal people out there highlighting, look at me, I'm building all of these flagship sets or whatever, right? But there's a huge base of set collectors that still exist. And I'd made that TikTok to show, hey, here's one 1992 Topps basketball common card that after fees, after shipping, after everything all in, I profited, or I made 26 cents on. And because everybody thought it was worthless, I paid less than a penny for it. And so I walked away with 26 cents. And not only, that doesn't sound like much for one card, but I sold 2,350 of these cards, not that exact one, but similar base and insert cards on Sport Lots last month. And after everything, I cleared over $600. And so, yes, I put in some work, but that's $600 that I now have to buy whatever I want to buy inside or outside of the hobby. And most people would have just dismissed it as not worth their time. I was looking the other day, I'm up to almost 150,000 cards that I've sold on Sport Lots at a minimum of 18 cents each. And most probably it's going to average closer to a quarter. So 25 cents times 150,000 cards over the last 5 or 6 years, that's a pretty decent chunk of change that's letting me build my hobby or my collection and letting me hobby for free.
Exactly. So for, those types of cards, like, is it mostly like 80s, 90s, or is it like, is there also like, some cards, more modern stuff that you're doing, or is it more of like, because in my thought process, I would imagine those 90s cards are probably a little bit harder to come by than some of the modern stuff. But like, is that what you're finding, or is it a lot more just kind of a combination of any year you can really think of?
Yeah, vintage sells great. So any vintage things, anything kind of pre-80 sells great. The junk wax era cards, they're a little harder unless you have a ton of inventory, because there is a ton of that's already loaded on the site. But if you've got a wide variety of inventory, people will start to load those things in along with a lot of other things to kind of consolidate their shipping. From a modern perspective, Heritage and Bowman prospects and flagship products just continue to sell great, because there's so many set builders for Heritage. There's so many set builders for the Topps flagship products, and prospecting is still, people love it, right? And so any of the Bowman prospects, especially like first Bowmans, they sell really well on Sport Lots as well. And then ComC is a little bit different. That I buy and flip a lot of stuff on the site itself, Things that I send in are usually things that I buy in my bulk collections that retail for somewhere between $1 and $20. Um, and I use them especially for that kind of stuff because it really helps me scale without much effort, right? It's still worth my time for sure to send it in, put it in a box, and then price it when it gets on the site. But I don't have to do any of the packing, shipping, any of that kind of stuff for all of the cards. So ComC has been a great way for me to be able to continue to scale up because they do all the work.
Yeah, and Ryan, Card Collector 2 is another guy that I kind of look up to from a just a content perspective. I mean, he's really stepped up his game, and I think one of the things that he talks a lot about is like going to shows and doing the like dollar box hunting. And I'm wondering from your perspective, like, is that something that you found also works for you? I mean, obviously I don't want you to give away your secret sauce here, but like, is the dollar box hunting something that you have participated in, or is it something that you found to be a good way, or is there a different way that you're doing, like you're sourcing your cards, I guess?
Yeah. One of the biggest ways that I source them, well, there's a couple different things I'll say to that. So one of the continued growth and expansion of what I'm doing from a card perspective kind of built on itself in 2020, and I took over part of an existing card shop, and kind of now on the weekends as a part-time effort, I have a physical card shop that I run. And that's one way that I source things because people bring them in and bring things in the door. The other thing that I will typically do is look for big collections, people who are looking to get out, people who, collected it a long time ago and are no longer interested and are just trying to clear space in their closets. But no, I love digging through quarter boxes and dollar boxes for overlooked stuff. That's one of my favorite things to do at the National is dig through people's quarter boxes. The singles club has their whole booth is everything's $1, sitting there. And when I belly up to the table at the singles club at the National, and there's Rich Klein, me, Dr. Beckett, and Bo from 1 Million Cubs, and it's like the four of us all right next to each other in a row going through these dollar cards. I feel like I'm in pretty good company looking through the dollar boxes to find some good value. So yeah, I love digging through the dollar box to find those small, buy it for $1, sell it for $6 or $7, and kind of rinse and repeat, and $3, $4, $5 profit at a time. When you're doing that hundreds or thousands of times a year, that adds up.
Yeah, I work with them with Hobby Hotline. So I mean, obviously that's a phenomenal group of guys to be kind of like hanging out with. I'm sure like you guys are finding cards and pass them around, showing each other. I'm sure that's probably a lot of fun. So like, I do feel like what you were saying about how like the set collectors, it's not exactly something that is maybe as talked about. I mean, on social media, I mean, I guess I don't know. Social media cards and all that kind of stuff it can be a little bit weird because it seems like the more, obviously the more flashy, the more, engagement you get on social media. And some people are running it as a business. Some people are kind of just doing it for fun. I mean, from your perspective, like, how have you seen social media change? Because being a content creator, I'm sure you're probably, pretty in tune, at least within like trending stuff. And I mean, I try and talk about some trending stuff, but also keep it to stuff that I'm interested in. Like, I'm not going to talk about a trending topic if it's not interesting to me. But from your perspective, like content creation, all that kind of stuff, how have you seen it change maybe since you got into like now, comparing I guess they're different eras, but either way, like how would you compare the difference in time periods?
Yeah, I think what I've appreciated now, and I don't know that it's changed so much as I didn't know where to look before, is that I think you can still find, or you can find social media content for whatever genre that you're interested in pursuing and collecting and learning more about. I think if you rely just on the main feed of whatever platform you're using, you're going to see a lot of, like you said, the flashy cards, the high dollar cards, look at me, crazy, stupid antics, whatever it might be, right? That are just, I find annoying sometimes. But I think what I've learned over these last couple of years is those types of things don't really appeal to me as a collector, and even
Right.
the market that I am in from a buying and selling perspective. But if I look hard enough, if I search for it, I can find people that are creating content that are based on vintage, that are based on set building, that are based on collecting base and insert cards, or player collecting not just their all the cards serial numbered to 25 or less and one-on-ones, but are player collecting or team collecting for the base and inserts. And they want 1,000 different cards of their favorite player, not just 5 or 6 super high dollar ones, right? And so I think the thing that I have realized is that social media content does exist. The other people on social media that like those same things do exist, but you just have to find your niche and focus in on that, and kind of filter out those aspects of the hobby and those aspects of hobby focuses that don't necessarily appeal to you. If it appeals to those other people, great, but it doesn't necessarily have to appeal to you, and that's okay.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I completely agree. I mean, I think it's interesting because sports cards in general have become, it's almost like there's niches within like a niche. And like, I mean, just in general, like I've noticed like niche things that used to be considered like kind of like not popular, like not part of popular culture, have like become popular, part of popular culture. I mean, like, we're seeing social media stuff with like different cards selling, and ESPN's writing articles, and Forbes and all these things. And, even just like sneakers and anime and video games. And so like, those are kind of, for me, like I like making the content. I enjoy talking about the kind of stuff. So like, it's definitely something that I found, if you can follow you can follow all the hobby accounts you want, but like it really does take a little bit of work to kind of find the type of content that you're interested in, and like the markets and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, also for you, like I think a big thing now that is really cool is like a lot of people are getting a lot better, I think, at telling like stories. And I think we're sort of writing the early stages of, the comparison that I usually use when I've talked to people is like, we have shifted. It's like fantasy sports, like when it shifted from like pen and paper to online, like that's sort of, I think, the scenario we're in. So like the storytelling, I think, has gotten a lot better. So I mean, for you, like, is that something that you spend any time on, like thinking and like writing out scripts? I mean, I do it for like TikToks and stuff like that, but like how in depth are you kind of in your content creation process when it comes to that type of stuff?
Yeah, I really want to be able to tell a story, right? And what I'm trying to tell is the story or the journey of my collection, right? And part of that story is the things that I'm adding to my own collection, and part of my hobby journey is the story of me buying and selling different collections, because that's what generated the money for me to be able to buy the things that I'm buying and adding to my collection. So I think that is really huge. And I think you touched on something else there that I think it's important for people to know is it's okay to follow somebody, hear what they have to say. And if their message and their story and their content is resonating with you, great. Dig in, go deeper, try to build a connection with that person, reach out to them, interact. That's a big piece. But it's also okay if you follow somebody for a while and you say, you know what? I don't really like the way that they're approaching things, or the types of cards that they're collecting. That's not really what I want to do. It's okay to not follow them, right? And I've done that as I have explored and tried to find out what different people are about. I've followed people for a while and then said, you know what, this really isn't the vibe I'm going for. Their stuff's not really for me, and I've unfollowed it, and I don't pay attention to them as much anymore. And I'll almost guarantee that there's people that have done that for me with the
Right.
blog and the podcast, right? Like there's so many voices that are out there right now coming at it from so many angles. There's so much video content and show reviews and card reviews, and there's so much stuff out there that there is truly a voice for everybody to connect with. And sometimes that's going to be me, and sometimes it's not, and that's okay.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I completely agree. I mean, I think along the way for me too, like content and like doing cards, I sort of created content the way that I learned how to, with that way I was learning about cards. Like I'd learn about a new thing and I would make a piece of content about it. Like that was sort of my content style. It's a little bit different now because I think I have a pretty decent grasp on the industry. So it's more of like maybe reacting to news and kind of predicting stuff that could happen in the future. But like I said, when I first got into this, it was a lot of like learning something and then talking about it. So for you, like, what has sports cards and what is maybe sports cards and content creation, like, what is it? Has it taught you anything? Like, have you learned any lessons from the industry or, I'm interested to hear from your perspective, like what you think about that.
Yeah. So I think I would say there's a couple things that the card industry as a whole, or me being a part of the hobby, maybe that's a better way to say it. Me being a part of the hobby as a whole has taught me. Some are specific about cards and some are more specific about me and as a personality. Right. So first of all, the way that I tried to approach things as I came back in with the buying and selling, that really highlighted for me the joy that I get from finding something that other people dismiss and see no value in and turning it into something valuable. Right. And so that is the profit that I've made from cards and the collection that I've been able to build from things that other people find as worthless. Right. And so I love that process. And so you asked me earlier too about, do you enjoy the selling, 25-cent cards on sport lots? The thing that I enjoy about it is I was able to take something that other people kind of cast off as worthless and turn that into thousands and thousands of dollars that I've been able to use for my collection. I love that process. I found that I really enjoy some of these cards that are also a little bit overlooked, some food issue cards. Vintage isn't necessarily overlooked, but it's different. Until this last maybe year or so, it was kind of not the thing to chase, right? There was a set of vintage collectors, but now it's kind of coming more on. But when I was building my vintage collection, it was not the popular thing to chase. I found that I love that type of stuff. And I found that I really love content creation. I had never formally written articles and things like that. I had definitely never done a podcast or YouTube videos or anything like that. I had minimal interviewing experience outside of like career related interviews that I did at the company that I work for. But I found that I really loved that, creating content and helping people learn and grow. I found that I really enjoy having those interview conversations for the podcast and the YouTube channel. Those are things that I really enjoy that I've been able to get better and better at as we go, and kind of leverage into other opportunities in my day job and other things like that. Because of the skills that I've learned doing this hobby, I've translated that into other aspects and other walks of life too. I mean, to think that when I was a 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old reading Beckett every week and poring over every article, to be able to turn the experience from the blog into having articles published in Beckett, like written that I wrote that are now in print, like distributed nationwide in a Beckett magazine. Like that's something I would have never dreamed as possible when I was a kid, but I've been able to see that come to fruition over these last few years as I've been creating content and engaging with the hobby community and just kind of having fun doing cards.
Yeah, I mean that the story there they had at the end that's extremely inspirational. I think the concept, I think for a lot of people that's kind of what it was like reading Beckett. It's like, and I mean that's so cool that now that you've got articles in there. And I mean, I think if you're a content creator or whatever, I think that there's tons of opportunities, whether you're trying to do a show or, writing a blog. So like, do you have any advice for someone who's maybe trying to start doing something similar that you're doing that maybe is a little bit nervous? Like I definitely, I agree. Like when I first got into cards, I was never a writer. I was a graphic designer. And, the classes that I hated in college were classes where I had to write stuff. So like, becoming more of a writer and doing like, podcasting and, internet interviewing and stuff like that, like it definitely wasn't something that I expected really to come out of it. So like, I mean, from your perspective, like, do you have any tips for anybody that's maybe trying to get into the industry, or even just any other industry? Like what are some tips you have on just like writing and kind of getting yourself out there a little bit more?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things, and none of these are original to me. They're all pieces of feedback that I got and advice that I was given as I was trying to get started doing some of this stuff, and are things that just I found a lot of value in and were true, right? As I tried to put them in practice. And a couple of them is, first, my advice would be, don't create content that is based on things that you just think are popular, but you don't really have a passion about or care about, right? So create the content that is true to who you are and what you care about and what you're passionate about, even if you're not sure what the audience will be for that content. Because being authentic and being true to yourself, I think, has to be the foundation of whatever type of content that you're going to create. The next thing that I would say is, as you get started, seek out feedback, because regardless of how passionate you are about it, there's always things that we can learn about how to best communicate those things that we're passionate about. And so whether that is a YouTube channel, whether that is written content, whether that's audio only on a podcast, seek out feedback about what you're doing from other people who have experience doing that, because there are pieces of that you can probably glean from all of that feedback that are going to make you a better content creator, and you can build on the success that you're already seeing and make your content even better. I think that's a huge piece that some people don't necessarily always think about when it comes to starting their content. And then I think the third thing that is super helpful, or that I found super helpful in getting started, was engaging with others in the community. So being active on social media, being proactive, reaching out via email or whatnot to connect with other collectors, connect with other content creators, and start to take advantage of the hobby community that we've got to, one, enjoy it all more, but two, to help other people get exposure to what you're all about. And by engaging with them authentically and interacting with them, and questions that they're asking, or tweets that they might make, whatever it is, you start to help people understand and get exposed to who you are and what you're all about. And then they come and want to check out more about what you've done or what you've created. I think those are kind of three things that, for somebody who's new or wanting to start getting into content creation, those are three things that I found super helpful as I was getting started a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I loved your first tip there, I think, is hit the nail right on the head. I mean, I think that's probably my top thing too, is like create content that you're interested in, because at least from my perspective, I've tried it both ways, and I definitely feel that like building an audience that's interested in what you have to say, and I've tried to figure out a way to explain it. Like, I found it better to create grow your audience because they want to listen to what you have to say, not what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's sort of I don't know if that's explaining it the best way, but I think it's like because you almost find yourself, when you get to a point sometimes when you try and just find trending topics and write about stuff that maybe you're not interested in, that will get clicks, it doesn't feel fun at that point, I think. And growing your audience based on kind of you as a person rather than what you're saying is kind of that's my top tip in general. And like I said, I think you nailed it. Like, being authentic to yourself and creating content that's authentic to kind of what you're interested in, I think, is like a major tip. And like, especially too, like, I think at first people may get discouraged because, the views or the numbers aren't as big. But I think what I found at least is that if you are creating the stuff that you want to create, the numbers eventually come down the road because you're not as focused on the numbers. So like the creation should be the fun part, I guess, which for me, it's kind of a combination of both. Like I enjoy the creation of the content, but I also kind of enjoy the reaction to some of the stuff. So it's definitely a combination of both for me. And I mean, we'll get back into sports cards a little bit here. So like from your perspective, like,
Can I say one more thing about that?
Oh yeah. Go for it.
Quick?
Definitely.
Yeah. So I think what you hit on there too, I think another thing to keep in mind when you talked about numbers, and Brett McGrath from Stacking Slabs talks about this a lot, is being less concerned about your total overall numbers and more concerned about the quality of the listener or the person, the follower that you've got. Right. And so it's one thing to have, this content that is just broad and you get a bunch of followers. But if I would agree with the way Brett describes it, is wanting to have quality followers who are engaging and more interacting and feeling like a part of a community than just look at all of these followers, because anybody can buy followers. Like anybody
exactly.
You can do things just to get followers or just to get clicks, like you said, but creating authentic content will help you build a quality base of readers, listeners, community that are much more connected to the message that you're trying to say, which I think is ultimately the more valuable piece of that for both them and for you, as far as getting fulfillment from that content creation.
Yeah. And I mean, even just from my personal experience, like there have been TikToks that I've made that I knew were sort of edgy, that were going to get people riled up a little bit. And those compared to the ones that are like something that I'm interested in, like, I don't know, there's just something about like, when you make, and I don't know if you've really experienced this at all, but like you make a video and it's like you kind of purposely framed it a certain way because people will comment or something, and then you get like comments, you just feel like icky. I don't know what it is about it. Like it's just like there's been a couple videos where it's like, I think specifically I remember one where I made that was like I was talking about BGS 10 labels or something like that, and I don't know, I framed it in a way that I knew was going to get people riled up, and I still even get people commenting on that video to this day being like outraged. And I'm like, I don't even really care that much about this video. Like, I don't want to make content that makes people upset too. That's kind of the other thing like that I found from that video specifically is like, and that was a big shift actually that I made. Like when I was making TikToks was like, I don't want to make something that I know is going to upset someone to comment, because it's like, there's times where, I create content, but I also use content, or I also use social media. And it's like, sometimes I'll find a video and I'll be like, oh my God, I hated that video so much. And it's like, maybe the person didn't do it on purpose, but it's like, if I know that I'm purposely saying something that could get people riled up or maybe, alter somebody's mood, I don't know. It's just not something that I love doing. I mean, it's something we all try and do a little bit, like a clickbaity, but at the same time, it's like, if you're at least trying to be rational, then like, that's sort of where, I've fallen into that bucket where I've done it purposely. And it just isn't, I don't know, it just doesn't hit the same way as like you make a video that you really like and people also really like it. And it's like, I like making those videos a lot more.
Yeah, sure. I definitely, there's a difference between coming up with a catchy thumbnail that is going to attract somebody to click on your video or your podcast link based on reality, right? Than creating a thumbnail that is pure clickbait and it has something that's like, what are they going to talk about? And then you click on it and they're pretty much not talking anything about what was on there, or it's so twisted from what they're trying to portray in the thumbnail, but then their video is really about like that type of video and that type of content creator. I will almost never subscribe to, and will almost go out of my way to avoid watching or listening to.
Right.
even though I know there's probably some things that they're saying that I would get value out of, because I don't like that approach and I don't want to reward people who take that approach. I can't say that I've never done that
Right,
ever.
exactly, same.
Because I'm sure somebody could go back and find something that I've done that is close to that. But I do my best, I'll say, to avoid misleading titles and thumbnails and things like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm in the same sort of boat. I mean, like I said, I'm sure there's videos that I've made that have been like that, but I try and stay away from it a little bit. I mean, Kamikaze had like a funny comment with talking about ComC. So I mean, like for you, I know you mentioned sports lots a lot, and you mentioned ComC. Like, are those kind of the two main places where you're buying and selling, or just selling, or kind of like are those like sort of your two main places where you're doing a lot of your business?
Yeah, from an online perspective, sport lots I use for a lot of the base and insert cards that I'm selling. I've got a couple 100,000 cards of inventory on that site, and I sell a few thousand cards, 2,000 to 3,000 cards a month on there. ComC is another big platform. I think I currently have. I'm gonna look real quick because I want to give you an accurate number. I don't want to mislead it. I currently have 139,398 cards for sale on ComC.
Wow.
And I've submitted about 22,000 of those directly that I've sent in, like physical cards I sent in. All of the rest of that inventory is things that I've bought and flipped on the site. Again, all of that 139,000 cards is inventory that's been completely paid for with profits. So I'm a net withdrawer on the site. So that's all been built with profits. So that's a huge site that I use. Again, flipping for anything. And then from what I've submitted, I primarily submit cards that are between $1 and $20. And then eBay is the third tier that I use for complete sets, factory sets, that type of stuff. Some of the more expensive cards that I have to sell that I want to turn around a little bit quicker. Other random memorabilia, ticket stubs, pins, buttons, any of that kind of oddball type memorabilia things that I get in these collections. And so eBay is another huge platform that I use to sell. So Sportlots, ComC, and eBay are my three primary platforms that I use to sell online.
Yeah, and we've seen. I feel like our industry has really seen so much change over the past few years and over the past, I guess you could say decade, but I mean, I think just even since like 2018, we've seen so much change. And, I don't think I necessarily would have predicted we would be at where we are if you were to ask me in 2018. Maybe I would if I had the same sort of knowledge, but like from your perspective, like in, a 5 to 10 year, in a 5 to 10 year window, like where do you kind of see cards going? Like what are some of your predictions that in 5 years we can come back to this video and see if you were right or wrong?
Yeah, I typically don't get involved too much in the speculation game. That's usually not the era or the type of thing that I go too far down in. But I think if I look back on how things have trended over these last few years, I think I'm going to speak just in broad terms because that's really all I'm comfortable in saying is we started to see an uptick in the interest in cards starting in probably 2017 with the Aaron Judge year. It kind of built with Ohtani. We started to build the collector base, which the newer base coming in had a higher interest in basketball and football cards, I think, than some of the long-standing collectors that had been there kind of prior to that 2016, 2017 window. And so we've kind of continued to see that grow. And so if we look 5 years out, we had this massive rush, peaked, kind of irrational exuberance that we saw. It's coming back down to a more moderate level. We've had some of those people who are only in it for the money and the only in it for the flip game. We've seen them kind of fade away. But I think overall, we're already still at a net higher amount of collectors than what we started with 3 or 4 years ago. And I think based on the efforts that Fanatics is going to undertake and their stated goals of growing the number of collectors by 10x over the next however many years, I don't know if they're going to be successful at 10x, but if we've already seen growth over the last 3 and they're going to be putting forth extra focus over the next 3 to 5 years, even if we 2 or 3x where we're at, that's still a huge amount of growth compared to the number of collectors that exist today or the number that existed 2 or 3, 4 years ago. And so I feel like in the next 5 years, we're going to see a greater number of collectors. As far as what's going to be hot 5 years from now, I've got no idea, because what's hot at the moment has already changed about 5 times in the last 2 years. And so
Right, exactly.
I have no idea what's going to be the flavor of the month in another 5 years, but there'll be something that people are going to chase, and there'll be people who are still passionate about all different kinds of collectors. My hope is that as more of these new and returning collectors kind of mature in this new era, that what we find is people settle into the niche that they are most passionate about and that they enjoy the most, and that kind of helps create less of the peaks and valleys we've seen as people move from soccer to Marvel to basketball to Prism to vintage to whatever. And we see more of a slow and steady growth as people find their own niches, and each of those niches continue to be built up from the growing number of people who are passionate about that type of thing. And it's not just chasing one thing after another. That's my hope for what we see more of in the next 5 years. I had hopes for the end of exclusive licenses for manufacturers, but Fanatics kind of put a big kibosh on that whole idea by taking over the exclusive licenses and consolidating those down, maybe even more than what we had seen before. So I don't know that is going to come to fruition, but I think we're going to see more collectors enjoying the hobby over these next 5 years. But I think the maturity that's going to come with it is going to lead to a more educated collector base that is not just going to chase trends, but is going to focus in on things that they're passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's some great insight. And I mean, I think too, like, we don't, it's such a, like I said, I think if you were to go back to 2018, even 2019, I mean, even if you were to go back to 2020, like, I don't think anyone would have predicted that Fanatics would have came in over the top rope and bought all the licenses and then bought Topps. And then, you know, Topps was almost going to go public and then they weren't going to go public. I mean, who knows? I think that's one of the other kind of exciting things about the industry is that it's kind of always constantly changing. And I mean, so I've actually got 2 more questions for you. So, like, I guess it's sort of similar to the last question. I'll flip it a little bit. So for you, like, where do you see sort of, and I don't mean to sound like I'm doing like a job interview here, but like, where do you kind of see yourself in the hobby in the next like 5 years or so, or even like 2 or 3 years, I guess maybe we'll go a little bit closer. Like, are you doing anything different from where you were maybe a couple years ago? Or is it like pretty, like, you figured out a formula, you figured out a system, you're planning on sticking to it?
Yeah, I've been able to, I feel so blessed to have been able to continue to kind of scale up the pace and the rate of what I've been doing from a buying and selling perspective, and what that's led for me to be able to continue to do from a collecting perspective. I kind of look for that to kind of continue to grow over these next few years as we keep going. And so I still see myself as an active buyer and seller. Will I still be doing the physical shop thing 5 years from now? It's hard to say. You know, there's a lot of time demands that could change what I do there. I think I'll definitely still be selling online, buying and selling online. I think from a content creation side, you know, I still really enjoy the writing and the podcasting and the video creation. What will that look like in another 5 years? It's hard to say, but as long as I'm still having fun doing it, I still hope to be a presence there. And so I think that's going to go in. And I think, you know, one of those things that I've learned is for myself as well is just really focus in on the things that you're enjoying and double down on it and kind of continue to pursue those passions and that aspect of your collection. And I'm going to continue to kind of build that out. So, you know, I hope to, right now I've built out vintage Topps baseball sets. I've completed 1967 basically through modern, and I've got I just finished 1960, and I've got partial sets built for the remainder of the cards, the 61 through 66 sets. And so, in another 5 years, I would hope that I'm able to finally knock the rest of those 60 sets off and be moving into the 50s a little bit more. And so there's things like that I'll be hopefully continuing to work towards from a personal collection perspective over the next 5 years. But I hope to be here having conversations like this, talking about what else we've learned in these last 5 years and kind of what crazy things came out of the left field, like the Fanatics situation did over the last year or two. So I hope to continue to be here collecting and sharing stories and sharing experiences and continuing to educate other collectors as they either come in new or return.
Yeah, I love hearing that. I mean, like I said, I think it's fun to kind of the industry is sort of you're always sort of on this, like, I don't seat of your pants. I don't think that's the saying, but like you're always kind of on your toes a little bit. So I mean, I got one last question for you before we kind of wrap things up here. What would you say is your dream card?
Yeah, I think if I was going to narrow it down, it would be a continuation of what I just talked about, right? So I've got this lifelong goal to build the 1952 through present day Topps baseball set, right? And so if I was what is going to be my kind of grail card, my lifelong dream card to own, it's probably going to be a 52 Topps mantle, and it's probably going to be the last one that I purchase to be able to complete that entire set run. And I will, even if I have an opportunity to buy it before then, I'll probably save it for last to be the icing on the cake for when I finish my entire vintage Topps run, going all the way back to 52. And so that's the 52 mantle is probably what I would say is my dream card, because the way I envision it, it's going to put the icing on the cake of that entire Topps run.
I love that. That's such a like a cool goal. I feel like for, especially someone like you, who's kind of you focus on a lot of like the base sets and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, yeah, that's a good, obviously, one of the holy grails of the hobby. So obviously that's going to be definitely a fun day whenever that hits your PC. So
it's going to be a while. I mean, I'm 45 right now, but it might be a 30 years. I might be in my 70s, when I finally accomplish that. I don't know. We'll see how things go, but yeah, that would be it.
Yeah, that's, like I said, it's a holy grail, and I think it's going to be a great card to add to the collection one day. I'm definitely, hopefully in 30 years, content creation is still a thing, and I'm excited to hopefully that maybe, there's your Instagram post will be the most liked sports card Instagram post, because it's like you can tell this story of the dream card, basically. Yeah, so like I said, I want to thank you so much for coming on, talking about tons of different topics. Let the audience know kind of where they can find you. I know you got the podcast, you're on Twitter, so TikTok, all those places. So just let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, the kind of the main landing page is waxpackhero.com. That's where all the written content is, and it's got links to everything else. The podcast is the Wax Pack Hero Sports Card Minute. It's available anywhere podcasts are found. I also have it's Mike Sommer. The YouTube channel is Mike Sommer. It's not Wax Pack Hero, but I talk all about it. But the links again are on waxpackhero.com to get to the YouTube channel as well. And then on Facebook, there's a Wax Pack Hero. Kind of it's more focused on my physical shop, and I more often have updates related to when I'm going to be open or not open or whatever from the physical shop. But that's Wax Pack Hero on Facebook. And then Instagram and TikTok are also Wax Pack Hero, and I'm pretty active. Definitely more active on TikTok. I'm beginning to get more active on Instagram. I was a little bit slower. I've been a little bit slow on engaging on Instagram over the years, but it's becoming a bigger and bigger part of what I share now as well. So the Mike Sommer on Twitter, like I'm pretty much everywhere, but the Wax Pack Hero is the biggest place to go, because it's got links to everything else.
Yeah, and I'll have you send me whatever links you want me to put in the description. I'll make sure all those links are in the description too, where they can find you and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, Mike, like I said, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a while since we've, talked face to face. I think probably the 2021 National in Chicago.
Yeah,
I think we
maybe.
ran into each other there and talked for a little bit, outside of the interview that we did on the podcast early on. So appreciate what you're doing as well, and appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely.